The first sign that something was wrong came on a Thursday evening. I had just gotten back from a long day at the law firm, the weight of contracts and legal briefs still buzzing in my mind. I pulled into the driveway, noting the dark windows of our suburban house. The place felt too still, like it was holding its breath. I pushed open the front door, dropping my briefcase on the entryway bench, and listened for any sounds of Lila moving around. But the only noise was the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I found her in her home office, seated at her desk, staring intently at her laptop screen. She didn't hear me approach, or if she did, she didn't bother to look up. The glow of the screen cast shadows across her face, highlighting the tightness around her mouth and the way her brows furrowed as she typed. She didn't usually bring work home. Her sessions with patients were strictly confined to the clinic. But lately, it seemed like she always had something to do, some reason to lock herself in her office and shut the door. "Hey," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She jumped, her fingers freezing over the keyboard before she quickly minimized whatever she'd been working on. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." "It's fine," she replied, turning in her chair and forcing a smile. It was the kind of smile she used with her clients, careful, controlled, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "I didn't hear you come in. How was your day?" I shrugged, trying to match her casual tone, but the unease had already started to gnaw at me. "Same old." A client decided he didn't like the terms of a deal we've been negotiating for weeks, so we're back to square one. "You know how it is?" She nodded absently, but her eyes darted toward her laptop, as if she couldn't wait to get back to whatever she was hiding. I forced a laugh, trying to break through the tension. "You seem distracted. Everything okay?" She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, and then she was back to that careful smile. "Yeah, just catching up on some paperwork from the clinic. It's been a busy week." "Right," I said, dragging the word out a little longer than I meant to. I noticed a small, elegantly wrapped box on the desk beside her laptop, a package I hadn't seen before. It was too fancy to be anything from a patient, wrapped in dark blue paper with a silver ribbon. "What's that?" Lila glanced at the box and quickly moved it out of sight, shoving it into a drawer. "Oh, just a little gift from a colleague. Nothing important." She was trying to sound casual, but the edge in her voice set off a warning bell in my head. Lila wasn't usually one to hide things from me. If anything, she loved showing off small tokens of appreciation from her patients, the little thank you cards and flowers that lined her office. But now, she was acting like she didn't want me to see this at all. I opened my mouth to press her on it, but then she closed the laptop, stood up, and walked past me, planting a quick kiss on my cheek. "Let's talk over dinner, okay? I'm starving." Before I could respond, she was gone, disappearing down the hallway toward the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed drawer where she'd hidden the package. A knot of unease twisted in my stomach, but I pushed it down, forcing myself to follow her. Dinner was a quiet affair, filled with small talk about my clients and her patients, but my mind kept drifting back to the box. After we finished eating, she cleared the plates and disappeared upstairs, claiming she needed a shower. As soon as I heard the water running, I headed back to her office. My pulse quickened as I approached the drawer where she'd stashed the package. I felt like a trespasser, but I told myself I had a right to know if she was hiding something. The drawer slid open easily, revealing the box inside. I hesitated for a moment, but then I pulled it out, carefully unwrapping the silver ribbon. Inside was a sleek, luxury wristwatch, nestled in a velvet-lined case. I turned it over, inspecting the back. There was an engraving on the stainless steel, but the initials weren't mine. "NE." They meant nothing to me. I heard the water turn off upstairs, and I quickly rewrapped the watch, sliding it back into the drawer. As I left the office, I tried to convince myself that it wasn't a big deal, that I was reading too much into things. But I couldn't shake the image of those initials, the way she'd hidden the watch so quickly when I asked about it. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling as she slept soundly next to me. The room was filled with the soft, rhythmic sound of her breathing, but my mind refused to settle. I kept replaying the moment in her office, the way her smile had seemed too practiced, too forced. I told myself that maybe I was imagining things. After all, I'd been working late a lot recently, throwing myself into cases to distract from the strain that had crept into our marriage. We'd had rough patches before, times when we seemed to drift apart for a while before finding our way back to each other. But this time, it felt different, like she was holding back something she didn't want me to see. I reached for her phone on the nightstand, telling myself it was just a quick check, that I'd feel better if I saw that everything was normal. Her passcode hadn't changed, but as I scrolled through her messages, I found a thread that had been deleted, only partially recovered through her cloud backup. The messages were short and cryptic, sent to a number saved under the name Work Contact. Lila, I don't think this is a good idea anymore. We need to talk. Work Contact. You owe me, Lila. Meet me tomorrow. Usual place. This is important. The message was dated the same day she'd received the watch. My hands shook as I locked the phone and put it back on the nightstand. A million questions raced through my mind. Who was this Work Contact? Why did she owe him? And what were they meeting about? I glanced over at Lila, sleeping peacefully beside me, and felt a jolt of something I hadn't felt in a long time: fear. Fear that the woman I had built my life with had secrets that could tear us apart. I decided not to confront her, at least not yet. I needed to know more before I accused her of anything. So the next day, after she left for work, I called in sick and reached out to a private investigator I knew from the firm. A guy named Eddie who owed me a favor after I'd helped him out of a tight spot a few years back. Eddie, I need you to look into a number for me, I said, reading off the digits from the message thread. Discreetly. He chuckled on the other end of the line. You know me, Sam. Discreet's my middle name. Give me a day or two. I hung up, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with dread. I told myself that maybe Eddie would come back with a simple explanation, that this was all some misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew that things were about to get a lot more complicated. And as I sat in the silence of our empty house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, that whatever I uncovered next, there would be no turning back. Eddie called me back 2 days later, just as the unease had settled into a constant, gnawing ache in my gut. I was at my desk at the office, trying to focus on a contract dispute when his number flashed on my phone. I stepped into a private conference room before answering, my pulse quickening with anticipation. I've got something for you, Sam, Eddie said, his voice low and conspiratorial, like he was sharing a state secret. That number you gave me, it belongs to a guy named Nathan Ellis. Nathan Ellis. The name was vaguely familiar, like something I'd heard once in passing and then forgotten. Who is he? Eddie hesitated. He's not a nobody, that's for sure. Used to run a security firm. Small, private, but he's got a reputation for being able to make problems disappear. I've heard rumors that he's got his hands in all sorts of shady dealings. You know the type. I leaned against the wall, trying to keep my voice steady. What kind of shady dealings are we talking about? Rumors of blackmail, a few cases where his clients' rivals suddenly back down from lawsuits, stuff like that. Hard to prove, but where there's smoke, there's usually fire. And here's the kicker. He and Lila have crossed paths before. She used to consult for him on some of his more complicated clients. I felt my stomach tighten. Lila had mentioned doing some consulting work a few years back, but she'd always been vague about the details, brushing it off as a side gig. What does he want with her now? Can't say for sure, Eddie replied, but I know this much. He's been in touch with her a lot over the past few months. Regular calls and a few meetings at a little cafe near the waterfront. And he's got a reputation for collecting favors. If she owes him, he might be cashing in. A sense of dread settled in my chest. I thanked Eddie and hung up, but his words echoed in my mind. If she owes him, he might be cashing in. It made a twisted kind of sense. The messages, the luxury watch, her late nights at the office. But the question that haunted me was why? Why was Lila caught up with a guy like Nathan? And what did she owe him? The next morning, I decided to find out for myself. I told Lila that I had an early meeting at the office, but instead, I drove to the cafe Eddie had mentioned, a small, out-of-the-way place overlooking the water. I parked a few blocks away and waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel as the minutes ticked by. It was almost noon when I spotted her, Lila, dressed in a dark coat, slipping into the cafe like she was trying not to be noticed. She glanced around before heading to a booth near the back, her expression guarded. 5 minutes later, Nathan arrived. He was taller than I'd imagined, with the build of someone who had once been in shape but had let time soften the edges. He wore a tailored overcoat and carried himself with an air of confidence that made my skin crawl. He slid into the booth across from Lila, and she leaned in, her expression serious. I couldn't hear their conversation from where I was parked, but I could see the tension in their body language. The way she gestured sharply, the way he occasionally leaned back with a smug smile, as if he was enjoying whatever power he held over her. I snapped a few photos with my phone, trying to steady my hand. They didn't look like lovers. There was no intimacy in the way they interacted, but there was a familiarity between them, like two people who shared a secret. After about 20 minutes, Nathan handed her an envelope, and she slipped it into her purse without looking inside. They exchanged a few more words before she stood up abruptly, her expression tight with anger. Nathan stayed behind, watching her leave with a satisfied smirk. As she walked out, I waited until she was out of sight before stepping out of my car and approaching Nathan. He didn't see me coming until I was right beside his table, blocking his view of the waterfront. "Nathan Ellis?" I said, keeping my voice low. He glanced up, surprise flickering across his face before he masked it with a cool smile. "And you must be Sam Whitaker. Nice to meet you." His calm tone caught me off guard, but I didn't let it show. "What's your game, Nathan? What do you want from my wife?" He leaned back in his seat, his smile widening. "Bold, aren't we? But I'm afraid you're asking the wrong questions. The real question is, what does your wife want from me?" I felt a flash of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I don't care about your riddles. You've been dragging her into something, and I want it to stop." Nathan's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold amusement. "You think you're protecting her, but you don't know her as well as you think. If you did, you'd understand that she's not some damsel in distress. She's got plans, and they don't involve you." He stood up, brushing past me as he headed for the exit, but not before pausing to deliver one last barb. "Take my advice, Sam. Walk away before you get hurt. Some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered." I watched him go, my fists clenched at my sides. His words echoed in my ears. "She's got plans, and they don't involve you." A sick feeling churned in my gut, but I refused to let it take root. Lila wouldn't betray me like that. She wouldn't get involved with someone like Nathan unless she had no choice. But then I remembered the envelope she had taken, the way she'd hidden the watch, the deleted messages. And I wondered if maybe I was the one who had been blind all along. That night, after Lila went to bed, I sneaked into her office and found the envelope. Inside was a stack of cash, neatly banded, far more than she should have access to. There was also a small USB drive tucked into the folds of the envelope. I slipped it into my pocket, my mind spinning with possibilities. Was this payment for something she'd done for Nathan? Or was it meant to be some kind of leverage, a bargaining chip in whatever twisted game they were playing? I couldn't sleep. The USB drive felt like a live wire in my pocket, buzzing with secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. But I knew that I had to see it through, that whatever was on this drive might hold the answers I needed. The next day, I drove to my friend's apartment, the one place I knew Lila wouldn't think to look. Tom was an IT guy with a knack for getting into places he wasn't supposed to. We'd worked together on some cases where his skills had come in handy, and he owed me a favor. I handed him the USB drive, trying to sound casual. "Can you take a look at this for me? See if there's anything encrypted?" Tom gave me a puzzled look, but shrugged. "Sure, give me a few minutes." I watched as he plugged in the drive, his fingers flying over the keyboard. He muttered something about password protection, but then a progress bar filled up and a folder appeared on the screen. Inside were a series of files, mostly surveillance footage and documents with cryptic titles. "What is this?" Tom asked, glancing at me. "These look like security reports." I leaned closer, my heart pounding as I scanned the folder names. There were reports on various people, businessmen, lawyers, even a judge whose name I recognized from a case I'd worked on. And then I saw it, a folder labeled Whitaker. Tom opened it, and my blood ran cold. Inside were photos of me, taken outside my office, my usual lunch spot, even the back door of our house. There were audio recordings too, conversations I'd had over the phone with clients, things I thought were private. "What the hell is this, Sam?" Tom asked, his voice sharp with concern. "You're being watched." I couldn't answer. I was staring at the last file in the folder, a document titled Instructions, LW. LW Lila Whitaker. I felt the room tilt, like the ground was slipping out from under me. My own wife had been keeping tabs on me, feeding information to Nathan. But why? What did she need surveillance on me for? And why was she working with a man who trafficked in secrets and blackmail? I grabbed the USB drive from Tom's hand, shoving it back into my pocket. Thanks, Tom. I owe you one. He frowned, clearly worried, but he didn't push it. Be careful, Sam. Whatever you're into, it's bad news. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead, trying to piece together a story that made sense. Lila had kept this from me, hidden it behind that careful smile, and now I had no idea what she was capable of. When I got home, I found Lila sitting on the porch, her expression serene as she watched the sunset. She looked so peaceful, like nothing was wrong. But now I knew that was just a mask. As I approached her, the weight of the USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than ever, like a secret threatening to drag us both under. Hey, she said, turning to me with that familiar smile. Long day? Yeah, I replied, forcing my own smile. But inside, the questions burned like acid. Very long. And as I sat beside her, pretending that everything was normal, I wondered how long I could keep playing this game before everything came crashing down. I barely slept that night. Lila lay beside me, curled under the covers like everything was normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about the files on the USB drive, the surveillance footage of me, the encrypted instructions signed with her initials. I tried to tell myself that there had to be an explanation, that maybe she had been forced into this, but the knot of doubt in my chest wouldn't loosen. The woman I thought I knew had a side I'd never seen, one that was capable of watching me, of lying to me without a second thought. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, slipping out of bed while she was still asleep. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. I took my laptop to the kitchen, where I could keep an eye on the stairs, and plugged in the USB drive again. I opened the folder marked Whitaker and started combing through the files, forcing myself to confront the evidence that was turning my life upside down. Most of the recordings were of me, mundane phone calls with clients, conversations with colleagues at the firm, all of it cataloged with unnerving precision. But then I stumbled across another folder, this one labeled Targets. Inside were more audio clips, each labeled with a date and a name, including some I recognized, people I'd represented in cases against powerful corporations. Clients who had confided in me, trusting me to keep their secrets. I clicked on one of the files, and a voice I recognized crackled through my headphones. One of my clients, a wealthy developer, discussing a settlement negotiation that I'd thought had been airtight. But there was another voice on the recording too, Lila's. She was carefully guiding the conversation, asking questions that seemed harmless at first, but then slowly edged toward details about his assets, his vulnerabilities. It was like listening to a skilled interrogation, the kind she'd never mentioned to me before. I felt my hands go cold as the recording continued. Lila had been using her sessions with my clients to extract information, feeding it into these reports. She'd been building dossiers on people who trusted her, people who had trusted me. What the hell was she doing? And why was she sharing this with Nathan? As the realization settled in, I understood the scale of the betrayal. Lila wasn't just hiding an affair or a secret side business. She was part of something much bigger. She had turned her skills as a psychologist into a weapon, gathering intelligence and feeding it into Nathan's network. And somehow, I had become a part of it without even realizing it. I stared at the screen, my thoughts racing. It was clear that Nathan had been using her to get leverage on powerful people, possibly for blackmail. But Lila's role wasn't passive. She was too calculated for that. She was a willing participant, gathering data on my clients, on me, and that meant she had a reason, a motive that went beyond just money. But what? What was she trying to gain from all of this? I thought back to my confrontation with Nathan, the way he'd smirked at me and hinted that I didn't know the real Lila. It was clear now that he'd been right, and that thought made my stomach turn. But it also gave me an idea. Maybe it was time for Lila to see that I wasn't as clueless as she thought. That evening, I decided to test her. I cooked dinner, playing the part of the husband trying to reconnect, and watched her carefully as we ate. She seemed more relaxed than she'd been in weeks, but I caught her glancing at her phone whenever she thought I wasn't looking. Her face would tighten, just for a moment, before she put the phone away and forced a smile. After we finished eating, I cleared the dishes, pretending to be lost in thought as I scrubbed the plates. I've been thinking about taking a few days off from work, I said casually. Maybe we could get away for a bit, just the two of us. She paused, her hand halfway to the wine glass. Really? You've been so busy lately. I shrugged, drying my hands on a dish towel. Yeah, but I think it's time I step back for a bit. Focus on what's important. I turned to face her, letting a note of uncertainty creep into my voice. I know things have been tough between us lately, and I'd like to fix that. For a second, something like guilt flashed in her eyes, but then she covered it with that same practiced smile. That sounds nice, Sam. Really? But I have a lot going on at the clinic right now. Maybe in a few weeks? Her response was exactly what I expected. She wasn't about to drop whatever she had going on with Nathan, not even for the sake of our marriage. But I pretended to accept it, offering her a smile that I hoped seemed genuine. Later that night, when she went upstairs to shower, I unlocked her office door with the spare key I'd found. My pulse quickened as I rifled through her desk drawers, looking for any hint of her plans, any clue that might explain what she was doing. That's when I found the folder, a slim, leather-bound binder hidden behind a stack of psychology textbooks. Inside were more reports, detailing various people she'd met with, people whose names I didn't recognize. But near the back, I found something that made my blood run cold. A handwritten note from Nathan. Lila, our next move depends on your husband's contacts. If he doesn't play along, make him see the risks of staying in the dark. We're running out of time. My hands shook as I read the note again, trying to make sense of it. What the hell did that mean? Make me see the risks. Were they planning to manipulate me into doing something? To drag me into whatever scheme they've been running? I shoved the folder back into the drawer, my mind racing with possibilities. It was becoming clear that Nathan's involvement with Lila went beyond blackmail or a secret affair. He needed something from me, something that Lila was supposed to facilitate. And if she was willing to go this far, spying on my clients, surveilling my life, then she was playing a long game, one I was only just starting to understand. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I lay awake beside her, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, the lies swirling around us like a storm. I thought about all the ways I could bring this crashing down around her. Handing the USB drive over to the authorities, confronting Nathan with the recordings, exposing everything. But I knew that if I acted too soon, she'd find a way to twist it back on me, to paint me as the paranoid husband trying to frame his wife. No, I needed to be patient. I needed to turn this situation to my advantage. The next morning, after she left for the clinic, I took the USB drive to my office and encrypted copies of the files onto a secure server. If anything happened to me, those files would go straight to a trusted colleague, someone who wouldn't hesitate to call in the authorities. Then I sat down with a legal pad and wrote out everything I'd learned so far. Every detail about Nathan, about Lila's involvement, about the surveillance, and the financial irregularities. As I wrote, a plan began to take shape, one that would force her and Nathan to reveal their true intentions. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be clean, but it might just give me the leverage I needed to turn the tables. That evening, I brought home flowers, acting like I was trying to smooth things over. Lila seemed genuinely touched, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the woman I used to know. But I couldn't forget what I'd uncovered, couldn't ignore the weight of the secrets that hung between us. As we sat down to dinner, I made sure to drop a hint, something I knew would reach her. I've been thinking a lot about the law firm lately. We're representing some interesting new clients, people with deep pockets and complicated histories. Sometimes I wonder what I'm getting myself into. I watched her carefully as I spoke, and I saw the way her smile faltered, the way her fingers tightened around her glass. It was subtle, but it was there, fear. Good. Let her wonder. Let her think that maybe, just maybe, I was starting to piece things together. The following day, I took another step. I scheduled a lunch with a former colleague, Ray Torres, a prosecutor I'd worked with back in my public defender days. Ray was the kind of guy who played things by the book, but he also understood when to bend the rules if it meant getting to the truth. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to gauge his reaction. over sandwiches in a busy downtown cafe. I slid a copy of the USB files across the table, letting him scroll through some of the less incriminating surveillance reports. It's complicated, Ray. I think my wife's in over her head, and I think she's connected to Nathan Ellis, who's been pressuring her to spy on my clients. I don't have all the pieces yet, but I need to know if you'd be willing to help me. Unofficially. Ray glanced at the files, his eyebrows lifting as he read through the notes. This is serious, Sam. If she's involved in a blackmail ring or corporate espionage, and you've got evidence, you should go to the authorities. Hell, you're a lawyer. You know the drill. I shook my head, leaning forward, my voice dropping to a tense whisper. If I go to the police now, Lila will bury me. She's good at this, Ray, manipulating people, making them believe her side of the story. I need more. I need something that makes it impossible for her to twist the truth. Ray studied me, his expression hardening as he realized how desperate I'd become. Okay, Sam, I'll look into Nathan Ellis. But you need to be careful. If you get too close to this, you're risking your career. Maybe more. I know, I said, my hands clenching under the table. Just don't let anyone else see those files yet. Not until I have the full picture. Ray nodded reluctantly, slipping the drive into his jacket pocket. I watched him leave the cafe, a knot of tension settling in my gut. This was my last lifeline. If Ray couldn't find anything concrete on Nathan, I'd be facing Lila and whatever game she was playing alone. That night, I pretended to be asleep when Lila slipped out of bed, creeping downstairs to her office. I waited a few minutes before following, staying just far enough back to avoid detection. As I approached her office, I could hear her voice, a low, urgent murmur, on the phone. I stopped outside the door, straining to catch the words through the thin wood. I'm telling you, he's getting suspicious, she whispered, her tone sharp. I've done everything you asked, but if he finds out what we're planning, it'll all fall apart. Nathan's voice rumbled in response, too muffled for me to make out, but I caught the anger in his tone. Lila's reply was clearer, more desperate. I don't care about the money anymore, Nathan. This was supposed to be simple. Now he's digging into things he shouldn't. You said you'd handle him if it came to that. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my ear closer to the door, my pulse racing as I realized the full weight of what she was saying. She wanted out of whatever she'd gotten involved in, but Nathan had other plans. Plans that involved handling me. I backed away before she could finish the call, retreating to the living room with my mind spinning. This wasn't just about money or blackmail anymore. Nathan was willing to hurt me, to do whatever it took to keep me from exposing their secrets. And Lila, my own wife, had known all along. The next day, I followed Lila again, this time to an abandoned industrial park on the edge of town. She parked her car behind a crumbling warehouse, glancing around nervously before heading inside. I stayed back, keeping to the shadows, my phone clutched in my hand as I snapped photos of her entering the building. I didn't dare follow her inside, not without knowing what or who was waiting in there. But a few minutes later, Nathan's black SUV pulled up, and he disappeared into the warehouse as well. I felt my stomach clench with a mixture of anger and fear. They were meeting in secret, out here where no one could see them, and that could only mean one thing. Whatever they were planning, it was coming to a head. I waited in my car, watching the warehouse entrance with my camera ready, but they didn't come out for nearly an hour. When they finally emerged, Nathan was carrying a metal briefcase, his expression grim. Lila followed, her face pale and drawn. I snapped a few more photos as they loaded the briefcase into the SUV and drove off in opposite directions. I stayed behind, replaying the images in my head. Lila's haunted expression, the tension between her and Nathan, the weight of that briefcase. I didn't know what was inside it, but it was clear that they were close to executing whatever plan they had in mind. And if I didn't act soon, I'd be the one caught in the crossfire. That night, I finally confronted her. We were sitting in the living room, the TV playing some mindless sitcom that neither of us was paying attention to. I turned to her, my heart pounding in my chest. I know you've been meeting with Nathan. The silence that followed was so absolute, it felt like the whole world had stopped. Lila froze, her hand halfway to her wine glass, and for a second, I thought she might deny it, play dumb. But then she set the glass down carefully, turning to face me with a look of quiet determination. "Who told you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no surprise in her tone, just resignation. "I have my sources," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know about the surveillance, the reports. I even know about the USB drive, the recordings of my clients. How long have you been lying to me, Lila? How long have you been spying on me?" She looked away, a muscle in her jaw twitching. "It's not what you think, Sam. I was trying to protect you. Nathan, he forced me into this. He threatened to ruin both of us if I didn't cooperate." "Really?" I snapped, the anger rising in my chest. "Because it sure as hell didn't sound like you were being forced when you were talking about handling me last night. How far were you willing to go, Lila? Were you planning to make me disappear too, if I got too close to the truth?" She flinched at that, her face twisting with a mix of guilt and anger. "You don't understand, Sam. He's dangerous. You have no idea what he's capable of. Then explain it to me," I demanded, my voice cracking with frustration. "Tell me why you kept this from me. Tell me what he wants." For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes glittering with unshed tears. Then she took a deep breath, gathering herself. "Nathan wanted access to your clients. He knew that some of them had secrets, things they'd pay to keep buried. He thought that if I could get inside information, he could use it to leverage them, force them into deals they didn't want to make. And he promised me that if I helped, he'd leave us alone." She paused, her hands trembling in her lap. "But then he started asking for more. He wanted me to watch you, to record your conversations, to find out who you were working with. And when you started asking questions, he said it was time to cut our losses. He said we'd gone too far to turn back." I felt a cold knot form in my chest, the final pieces of the puzzle snapping into place. She'd been gathering intel on me, on my clients, feeding it to Nathan in the hopes of keeping him at bay. But now that I was closing in on the truth, Nathan saw me as a threat, and so did she. "And what about the money?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's in the briefcase?" Lila's face went pale, her expression stricken. "It's a payment," she said finally, her voice hollow. "The last one. He told me that if I delivered it, he'd let us go, that he'd walk away, and we could start over." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that filled the room. "And you believed him?" She didn't answer. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate kind of hope, as if she still thought she could convince me that she'd been doing all of this for us. But I saw through her now, saw the lies and the manipulation, the cold, calculating mind that had been working behind those kind smiles. I stood up, turning my back on her, trying to ignore the tremor in my hands. "It's too late, Lila. I'm going to the police. I'm turning in the drive, the recordings, everything. You'll have to answer for what you've done." Her voice trembled as she spoke, but there was a hard edge beneath it, a warning. "If you do that, Nathan will come for you, Sam. He won't let you walk away from this. He'll bury you, and I can't stop him." I turned back to her, meeting her gaze. "Then I guess we'll see which one of you gets to me first." I barely slept that night, the weight of Lila's confession pressing down on my chest like a stone. Her words replayed in my mind. "Nathan will come for you, Sam. He won't let you walk away from this." But I was past the point of caring. I needed to end this, to force Lila and Nathan's hand before they found a way to turn their lies into a noose around my neck. By dawn, I had made my decision. I dressed quickly, tucking the USB drive into my pocket alongside the burner phone I'd purchased the day before. Lila was still asleep when I slipped out the door, her silhouette a dark shape under the covers. I hoped that some part of her had meant it when she'd said she wanted to protect me, but I wasn't going to bet my life on it. My first stop was Ray's office. I laid everything out for him. The USB drive, the photos I'd taken of Nathan and Lila at the warehouse, the recordings of her conversation with Nathan. As he flipped through the files, his expression shifted from confusion to anger, then to a grim kind of focus. "Jesus, Sam," he muttered, glancing up at me. "This is bigger than I thought. You've got enough here to implicate both of them, but it's not airtight. If Nathan decides to disappear, or if he has a way to discredit your evidence, this could blow up in your face." I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. "I don't care about airtight, Ray. I just need a reason to get them both in the same place. Somewhere public. Somewhere I can force them to show their cards." Ray studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll get some people on standby. But be careful, Sam. If either of them realizes what you're doing before you can get them cornered. He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't have to. I knew what kind of danger I was walking into. But as I left Ray's office, I felt a strange kind of clarity settle over me. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something sharper. Determination. I wasn't going to let Lila and Nathan play me anymore. I made the call to Nathan from the burner phone, keeping my voice calm, controlled. It's Sam Whitaker. We need to talk. There was a brief pause. Then Nathan's voice crackled through the line, filled with that familiar arrogance. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Sam. Oh, I think we do. I replied, glancing at my watch, timing my words. I know about the briefcase, about the payment. If you don't meet me, I'll take what I know to the police, and I'll make sure they dig up every skeleton you've buried. Nathan let out a short laugh, but there was a tightness in it. You're bluffing. Meet me at the Greenview docks by the warehouses in an hour, I said, ignoring the taunt. Bring Lila. This is your one chance to clean up the mess you've made. If you're not there, I'll make sure the mess gets a lot worse. I hung up before he could respond, hoping that the uncertainty in my voice wouldn't betray how desperate I really was. I knew the docks were the last place Nathan would expect me to pick. Too exposed, too public. But that was the point. I wanted him to feel uneasy, off balance. I wanted to control the narrative for once. I got to the Greenview docks early, parking my car out of sight behind a row of shipping containers. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows over the abandoned warehouses and rusted cranes that lined the waterfront. I walked to the meeting spot, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness, and positioned a small voice recorder in the pocket of my jacket. As I waited, the cold wind from the water bit through my clothes, but the chill inside me was deeper. This wasn't just about exposing Lila's betrayal anymore. It was about survival. A few minutes later, I heard the crunch of gravel under tires. Nathan's black SUV pulled up, and I tensed as he stepped out, his eyes scanning the area before they landed on me. Lila followed him, her face pale against the fading light, but her expression was unreadable. She avoided my gaze, focusing on Nathan as if she could find some reassurance in his presence. Nathan smirked as he approached, hands in his pockets. You're full of surprises, Sam. I didn't think you had it in you to play hardball. I've learned a few things recently, I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. You got a choice, Nathan. Walk away now. Leave Lila out of whatever mess you've made, or this ends with both of you in handcuffs. Nathan raised an eyebrow, but his smirk faltered when he saw that I wasn't backing down. He glanced at Lila, who kept her expression carefully neutral, then back to me. You think you're in control here, Sam? He asked, his voice dripping with condescension. You're playing with fire. I took a step closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. No, I'm just not afraid of getting burned anymore. Nathan's expression darkened, and he reached into his coat, pulling out a sleek handgun. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to stay still, to keep my hands visible. He kept the gun pointed at me, but his attention shifted to Lila. He's not going to stop, Lila. You know what has to be done. She hesitated, her hands clenched at her sides. For a moment, I thought she might actually side with him, that she might let him pull the trigger and end this. But then she stepped forward, her face a mask of determination, and placed herself between us, blocking Nathan's aim. No, Nathan, she said, her voice steady but low. I'm done taking orders. You've had your chance to clean this up, and you've failed. Nathan's eyes flashed with anger, and he pressed the gun to her back. Move, Lila. You know what's at stake here. But she didn't budge. Instead, she turned to face me, her expression softening, as if she'd made some kind of peace with what was about to happen. Sam, I know you'll never forgive me, but I'm asking you to walk away now, before he does something you can't take back. I held her gaze, my breath catching in my chest. You're the one who needs to walk away, Lila. I have the recordings. I have everything I need to bring this down on both of you. Nathan's grip tightened on the gun, and I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. You're lying. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone, and played the recording I'd taken from the USB drive. Lila's voice discussing payments, mentioning my name, the plans Nathan had made to handle me. The sound echoed off the metal containers around us, filling the air with the weight of betrayal. Nathan's face twisted with rage, and he shoved Lila aside, turning the gun on me. "You think this changes anything? You're just making it worse for yourself." But before he could squeeze the trigger, Lila lunged at him, knocking his arm to the side. The gun went off, the shot ringing out across the docks, and I felt the rush of air as the bullet passed by my ear, slamming into the metal container behind me. I tackled Nathan, wrestling him to the ground as the gun clattered out of his grip. We struggled in the dirt, his fists connecting with my ribs, my vision blurring with the impact. But I fought back, using every ounce of desperation to pin him down, wrenching his arm behind his back. Lila grabbed the gun from where it had fallen, her hands shaking as she pointed it at Nathan. "Enough," she shouted, her voice breaking. "It's over, Nathan. It's over." For a moment, he stopped struggling, looking up at her with a twisted smile. "You don't have it in you, Lila. You never did." But I saw something change in her expression, a hardness that I'd never seen before. She pressed the barrel of the gun against his temple, her hand steady. "Don't test me." A siren wailed in the distance, the sound cutting through the tense silence like a knife. Ray's backup, coming to close the net. Nathan's smirk faltered, and I could see the calculation in his eyes as he realized that he'd lost control of the situation. He slumped back against the dirt, his expression turning bitter. "You're going to regret this, both of you." I met his gaze, my breath ragged. "I already do." The police arrived a few minutes later, Ray leading the charge. Nathan was cuffed and led away, shouting threats that dissolved into the noise of the waterfront. Lila and I stood in the shadows, side by side, watching as they searched the SUV, as they secured the briefcase and cataloged the scene. She turned to me, her face pale, her eyes haunted. "You didn't have to do this, Sam." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved, and saw the stranger she had become. "Yes, I did." She lowered her gaze, a tear slipping down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. "You've sealed my fate, you know. Whatever happens next, it's on you." I didn't answer. I just walked away, leaving her to face the consequences of the choices we'd both made. The scene at the docks was a blur of flashing lights, shouted commands, and cold steel as the police took Nathan away in cuffs. Ray pulled me aside, his expression a mixture of relief and concern as he debriefed me on the spot. He assured me that my cooperation would weigh in my favor when the authorities started sorting through the mess Lila and Nathan had created. But his words barely registered. My thoughts were focused on Lila, sitting on the back of an ambulance, her hands trembling as a paramedic bandaged a cut on her arm. She looked so small and fragile in that moment, so unlike the woman who had pointed a gun at Nathan just minutes ago. But I knew better than to let my guard down. Lila was a survivor, and even now, I could see her mind working, trying to find a way out of this that didn't end with her behind bars. Ray cleared his throat, dragging my attention back to him. "Sam, listen to me. Nathan's dangerous, but so is your wife. Whatever she tells you, don't let her get inside your head. We got enough to press charges on both of them, but she's not going to go down without a fight." I nodded numbly, watching as Lila caught my gaze from across the police line. For a moment, our eyes locked, and I saw something in her expression that I couldn't quite place. Anger, maybe, or regret. But there was something else, too, a glimmer of hope, like she still believed she could talk her way out of this. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to. A few hours later, I found myself sitting across from Lila in a police interrogation room, a small space lit by a single overhead light. She had insisted on speaking to me alone before giving her official statement, and against Ray's advice, I agreed. I needed to hear her side of the story one last time, needed to see if there was anything left of the woman I thought I'd known. She looked tired, shadows darkening the hollows of her cheeks, but she held her head high, her gaze steady. "They're going to charge me with conspiracy, Sam, and I know that I deserve it. But there's a way for both of us to walk away from this, if you're willing to listen." I crossed my arms, leaning back in the metal chair, forcing myself to maintain a mask of indifference. "What makes you think I'd believe anything you say?" She flinched, but she kept her voice even. "Because you know Nathan's not going to stay quiet. He'll cut a deal, give up anything he can to save himself. And that means dragging you into this. He'll twist the story, make it sound like you were a willing participant in everything. If you let this go to trial, it's your word against his. My jaw tightened. I knew she wasn't wrong. Nathan had proven himself willing to throw anyone under the bus to protect himself. And the lines between victim and conspirator had already blurred beyond recognition. But I refused to show her that she'd struck a nerve. "What's your point, Lila?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. "You want me to help you cover this up? To let you walk free?" She shook her head, her expression turning earnest. "No, I want you to let me take the fall. I'll sign a statement admitting to everything, claiming I manipulated you, that you didn't know what I was doing with Nathan until it was too late. But in return, you need to keep those recordings out of the official evidence. You can't let them hear what I said about you, about us." Her offer hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, struggling to understand what game she was playing now. "Why would you do that?" She looked away, her shoulders slumping, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I thought I saw a flash of genuine emotion in her eyes, something that looked like remorse. "Because I'm tired, Sam. Tired of lying, of pretending I can fix this. And because I owe you that much, at least." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I realized with a jolt that she was telling the truth, or at least a version of it. She was offering me a way out, even if it meant sacrificing herself. But there was still something she wasn't saying, something she was holding back, and I wasn't sure if I could trust this last act of desperation. I studied her, searching for any sign of manipulation, but all I saw was a woman teetering on the edge of defeat. "And what happens after that, Lila? What happens when they find out that I covered for you?" She met my gaze, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "They won't find out. You're good at keeping secrets, remember?" I felt a pang in my chest at her words, the reminder of all the things we'd hidden from each other over the years. But I pushed it down, focusing on the decision in front of me. Lila's offer was a dangerous gamble, one that could clear my name, but only if I was willing to keep lying, to carry one last secret for her. The next day, I handed over the USB drive to Ray, but I kept one crucial piece: the recordings of Lila's conversations about me. As she promised, she signed a statement admitting to her role in the scheme, framing herself as the mastermind who had used Nathan's leverage to manipulate me. The police were skeptical, but with her confession and the evidence I provided, they had enough to proceed with the case. Nathan, true to form, tried to strike a deal, claiming that Lila had coerced him into their partnership. But his story was inconsistent, riddled with half-truths that fell apart under scrutiny. With Lila's signed confession and the financial records tracing back to Nathan's offshore accounts, the authorities decided to move forward with the charges against both of them. It was a bittersweet victory, one that left a sour taste in my mouth even as the legal machinery ground on. Lila's trial was set for months later, and Nathan's fate was all but sealed. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the sense that I'd made a mistake, that in choosing to protect myself, I'd let her manipulate me one last time. The night before her transfer to a federal detention center, I received a letter from Lila, written in her familiar, precise handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, my hands trembling as I unfolded the pages. "Sam, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I meant what I said in that room. I did try to protect you in my own twisted way. Maybe that doesn't matter anymore, but it's the truth. I know you kept the recordings. I know you'll use them if you need to, and maybe that's for the best. But if you ever find yourself doubting what happened, if you ever wonder whether I really loved you, just remember that I had a chance to destroy you, and I didn't. Take care of yourself, Sam. And remember, you were always better than me." Ed, I crumpled the letter in my hand, a surge of anger and grief rising in my chest. I wanted to believe her, to take those words as some kind of twisted closure. But I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt, the fear that even this final act of honesty was just another manipulation, another way to keep me tangled in her web. I burned the letter in the sink, watching the flames consume the last trace of her. But I kept the recordings, tucked away in a safe, a reminder that the past could never truly be erased. Months later, I sat in the quiet of my new apartment, watching the news as the anchor reported on Lila's sentencing. The footage showed her being led out of the courthouse, her face hidden behind a mask of composure, her eyes dark with some private grief. They gave her 10 years for conspiracy and fraud, and Nathan got even more. But as I listened to the reporters speculate about the psychologist-turned-criminal mastermind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story was far from over. I poured myself a drink, staring out at the city lights beyond the window, the weight of the secrets I still carried pressing down on me. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I'd traded one kind of lie for another, one burden for something heavier. And sometimes, late at night, I dreamed that I saw her face in the crowd, watching me with that same calculating smile, as if she knew that no matter how far I ran, I'd never truly escape what she'd done to me, or what I'd become because of her.